relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The particulars in association with the recent split between Daniel Dubois and Shane McGuigan, and how Shane elected to stay on board with Carolyn, just not her older brother. Shane says that he was put in a compromising position, but by who? Was it Daniel? Was it Daniel's team or Daniel's father? Shane McGuigan has confirmed to Boxing News that he will no longer be training heavyweight contender Daniel Dubois. The 25-year-old will now work with veteran coach Don Charles. Daniel's younger sister Carolyn will continue to be managed and trained by Shane. In May 2021, it was announced that the powerful heavyweight and McGuigan would be teaming up. Dubois, 19-1 with 18 KOs, had parted ways with longtime trainer but still current manager Martin Bowers 3 months on from his only career loss against Joe Joyce in November of 2020. Mark Tibbs then looked set to work with Dubois but chose to pass on the opportunity of becoming his cornerman after a brief time together. Dubois and McGuigan's partnership produced 4 wins in 4 fights. But the last fight, the last quote-unquote win, we know what happened. Daniel came very close to being stopped by a cruiserweight who moved up in weight in Kevin Lorena, a southpaw, and what read to me like preparation for a potential Usyk fight beyond that fight. I think that fight may have caused them to reconsider fighting Usyk. Dubois and McGuigan's partnership produced 4 wins in 4 fights against Bogdan Dinu, Joe Cusumano, Trevor Bryan, and Kevin Lorena, respectively, all of which has landed Dubois on the cusp of a fight against heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk. McGuigan spoke to BN earlier today, Tuesday, about the shock split. I was put in a very compromising position. By who? I don't think Shane is at liberty to tell. And even if he were, I don't think he'd want to, because he has a working relationship with Carolyn Dubois, Daniel's sister. An ongoing partnership. You don't want to make waves. So we're left to wonder how it works out to where he stays on board with Carolyn, but he's not on board with Daniel anymore. That partnership is over. How did that come into being? We may never get the answers. Not that it matters, because I think Carolyn Dubois stands a better chance of becoming not just the champion, but a unified and one day undisputed champion than her older brother. You heard what I said. Carolyn has a higher ceiling than Daniel. I decided to continue my working relationship with Carolyn at the expense of losing Daniel, really, which is a bit of a shame. Is it because of Daniel's last performance? Is it because Shane didn't have enough time to go around for every individual fighter in his stable, that he's training the likes of Ellie Scottney for a title fight, and Carolyn Dubois and Daniel Dubois, several other fighters? Could that be the situation? Sounds like it was an either-or situation. Either you train Carolyn or you train Daniel. Because look at what Shane said. I decided to continue my working relationship with Carolyn at the expense of losing Daniel. Carolyn's got the higher ceiling, it's just the truth. Anybody that knows anything about boxing can see that. The last fight, I did a fantastic job with him and kept him in the fight, and he won the fight, said McGuigan. I feel like I did a great job. It's disappointing that I've been put in this compromising position. Did they make him choose? Because if they did, I think he chose right. The 34-year-old says there is no bad feeling towards Dubois, and he wishes him every success under the guidance of Don Charles. I'm happy that he's going with Don Charles, because Don Charles is a friend of mine. I can feel confident that he's going to get looked after properly. I wish him all the best moving forward. Daniel Dubois is just the latest fighter to leave the McGuigan stable. Some weeks ago, we found out that Lawrence Okolie had parted ways with Shane McGuigan. And now it's Daniel, but he's still got Carolyn, he's still got Carolyn Dubois, Ellie Scottney, he's still got CBS, he's still got Chris Billum-Smith, who's set to be fighting Lawrence Okolie, Shane's former fighter, very soon. Interesting dichotomy between Lawrence and Chris and Shane, that so soon after Lawrence left Shane McGuigan, left that stable, Shane appears in the opposing corner. He used to train Lawrence, who was stablemates with Chris, and now, here, he's training Chris to beat Lawrence. Interesting dynamic, as he'll have the inside track on Lawrence Okolie. It'll be up to Chris to take advantage and adhere to Shane McGuigan's tutelage. In truth, I think Shane made the right decision. If he had to make a decision between going with Carolyn or going with Daniel, the time is right to be in the Carolyn Dubois business. Look, Katie Taylor, God bless her, she's not going to be around forever. Carolyn campaigns at the same weight as Katie. Katie holds all the belts there, and some feel that her career is in its twilight years, that it could end soon, and when it does, Carolyn Dubois may be in position to either pick up one of Katie's belts or if Katie wins this weekend, wins all the belts at 140,
then moves back down and vacates them.
Stays at lightweight. Carolyn can then move up and pick up one of those vacant titles. It's the right time to be in the Carolyn Dubois business. It really is. And as stated, I think Carolyn has a way higher ceiling than her brother. There's no easy way to say that. There's not a nice way to put it.
But that's how I feel. What do you want me to say?
She's younger than Daniel, with a higher ceiling than Daniel, and greater potential to become a marquee attraction, a draw, a champion, unified, and perhaps undisputed. She's the real thing.
Shane knows that.
So I think he made the right decision. It sounds like an amicable split to where Shane ain't got no hard feelings for Daniel, and he's still working with Daniel's sister. In men's junior middleweight news, per tweet from Michael Benson, the WBO have now stated they will order Jermell Charlo to defend his undisputed WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO super welterweight world titles versus Tszyu by September 30th at the latest, providing Tszyu beats Carlos Ocampo on June 18th. More incentive for Tszyu to not take Carlos Ocampo lightly.
No.
Don't look past him. Take him seriously.
So long as he does. So long as Tszyu stays in character, he should win. He's shown his quality in the Takeshi Inoue fight, the Terrell Gausha fight, the more recent
fight with former WBC champion Tony Harrison. Tszyu has lived up to my expectations opposite the ring. Carlos Ocampo, I think he will continue to do that, as has this order from the WBO. I told you this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, an order from the WBO would come down that would put Jermell Charlo on the spot, because the WBO has fast become the sport's straight shooter in terms of sanctioning bodies. It used to be the IBF.
But they've become too laxed, too lackadaisical over time with their mandates and their mandatories, some of their decisions.
Yeah.
The decision to strip Joe Cordina so soon after he was injured.
Why'd they put so much pressure on Joe while being so lackadaisical with Jermell, who has a mandatory challenger in the queue that's been waiting there since 2019, since before Jermell won the belt?
The IBF ain't what they used to be, but the WBO has fast become the sport's straight shooter. Johnny on the spot with their mandates.
This is a significant bit of news, because now that the order has come down, the time frame for all these events to take place is set. And if for any reason Jermell Charlo is unable to comply, he will be stripped. My honest opinion is that this fight don't see the light of day. I don't think this fight is going to happen.
Not because Jermell Charlo is afraid of Tszyu, but because the decision has been made on Jermell Charlo's behalf that the people at the PBC, they may have something else in mind for him, some other plans, and it doesn't behoove Jermell.
It's already been a year since Jermell Charlo's last fight, the rematch with Brian Castano.
A year.
If the time frame to take care of Tszyu as your mandatory challenger is no later than September 30th, that doesn't give you a lot of time to do much.
I wonder if between now and September 30th, would the WBO allow Jermell Charlo to take in another fight, perhaps a tune-up fight to shake off the ring rust? Tszyu's not available. He's busy. He booked himself a fight.
He's fighting Carlos Ocampo, and because he's fighting Carlos Ocampo, does Jermell Charlo have the wiggle room to stage a tune-up fight in, say, late June, July?
Early July.
I say early because he has to satisfy Tszyu as a mandatory no later than September 30th. He doesn't have a lot of time.
I'll tell you this much. If news breaks that Jermell Charlo will be returning sometime in June, sometime in early July, I might be more confident that a fight between him and Tim happens.
On a schedule like that, that would be playing it close to the chest. However, it would indicate that Jermell is in preparation for a fight with Tim, if that news were to break. If it doesn't, what that communicates to me is the fight might not happen, because it's less than ideal for Jermell Charlo, experienced as he is, decorated as he is.
That's a very long layoff.
You see that there's talk of Jermell's brother, Jamal, returning to the ring. And it's already confirmed that he won't be returning against Carlos Adames. Carlos is fighting Julian Williams.
For the same reason that Jamal isn't fighting Carlos next, that's the same reason I believe that Jermell wouldn't fight Tim next. Not if he doesn't squeeze in a tune-up fight.
If he doesn't fight him, I don't know what he does. You know, maybe he takes care of Bakram Murtazaliev or Brian Mendoza. Bakram's is mandatory by way of the IBF. Brian Mendoza's is mandatory by way of WBC. Maybe he can tune up with one of those guys en route to a Tszyu fight next year?
Maybe. That's if he's still at junior middleweight. He might move up.
In any event, the deadline is set. and Jermell Charlo must comply or let the belt fly.
We'll see what happens.
Finally, in men's super lightweight news, on the heels of this weekend's controversial stoppage in the Romero versus Barroso fight, Barroso's manager and trainer says Rolly should be made to have a rematch or have the title stripped.
Fights like Romero versus Barroso and that outcome, how it all ended, are a grim reminder that sometimes boxing is barely a sport.
Sometimes what you're watching isn't a contest, and the outcome is preordained. Romero should be made to have a rematch, Fernandez told BoxingScene.com through a translator. If not, he should have the title stripped away from him. Don't get me wrong, Rolly has no blame in this whatsoever. It's just that I feel that he was gifted the title.
Venezuela's Barroso, who dropped Romero in the third round, was ahead on all three judges' scorecard when Weeks weirdly stepped between them and declared Romero the victor by TKO at 2 minutes and 41 seconds in the ninth round at the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas.
Romero recorded a knockdown, which should have been recorded as a pushdown, after hurting Barroso with a left hook early in the ninth round. The newly crowned champion pushed Barroso to the canvas after hurting him, but Weeks still called it a knockdown.
Barroso slipped most of Romero's punches later in the ninth round and grazed Romero with a right hand just before Weeks decided to stop their scheduled 12-round fight.
I can accept that the knockdown was a push, Fernandez said. They want to call it a knockdown? Okay, whatever. But with the stoppage, the rules state that you have to be willing to follow the guidelines in order to stop the fight. You can't just run in and stop the fight like that. We saw that Barroso was the one punching him, not the other way around. When we were in the locker room, that's what was so frustrating for us, because we couldn't understand where the decision came from. That's what rips you apart, really.
That decision was made before the opening bell sounded. That decision was made before both men set foot in that ring. It was their intention to put a title in Rolly Romero's hands by any means necessary, even if it meant robbing Barroso in front of everyone.
We talked to the WBA president, Fernandez said, and he said, yeah, he should get a rematch right away because it was a travesty. And then, when you see the cards and that he was winning unanimously and that people here saw that he was winning, if everyone sees it but the ref, there's something to it, right?
Right.
So Fernandez and Barroso are under the impression that the WBA will hold to their word and get them a second fight with Rolly Romero, get them a rematch. But can the WBA be trusted to do what is ethical? I remember a couple of years ago when Ryota Murata took on Hassan Endam, and the judges, quite strangely, scored the fight for Endam, even though it was obvious he was getting outworked and pushed around. The WBA themselves did order a rematch.
They said they were going to, and they did. Will that be the case here and now with Rolly Romero?
Don't forget that the winner of the fight was supposed to be facing O'Hara Davies afterwards. Rolly Romero says nobody knows who the hell O'Hara Davies is. Me and Ryan is more important.
Ryan Garcia.
Ahead of the fight, before its controversial outcome and ending, it was stated that the winner of this fight between Romero and Barroso would have to face O'Hara Davies afterwards. But now
I'm not so sure.
When asked by BoxingScene.com about battling Davies next, the newly crowned WBA super lightweight champion repeatedly mentioned that he only wants to face Ryan Garcia in his first title defense. Romero believes a fight against Garcia belongs on pay-per-view, whereas there wouldn't be nearly as much interest in him in facing England's O'Hara Davies. Me and Ryan Garcia is more important for boxing, Romero told BoxingScene.com. Nobody knows who the hell O'Hara Davies is, and that's that. We're gonna make that fight happen. Me and Ryan Garcia.
It's funny hearing Rolly Romero talk like this when he basically got beat out on Saturday night by Yanni Alimkhanalai.
You talk about notoriety, you talk about having a profile. Listen, maybe more people do know who Rolly is than Yanni Alimkhanalai, but more people didn't watch Rolly.
Nope.
More people watched Yanni Alimkhanalai.
How do you reconcile that?
Just because you know who Rolly is doesn't mean you're a fan of him. Doesn't mean you have a high opinion of his boxing. Just because you're aware of his existence doesn't mean you want to watch him box.
More than 2 times the people that watched Rolly Romero versus Ishmael Barroso watched Yanni Beck versus Butler. Yanni Beck versus Butler brought in approximately 700,000 views, whereas
Romero versus Barroso peaked at a meager 300,000 views. 300,000.
less than half the views of the Alimkhanalai fight.
But Rolly thinks he's big time. He thinks he's king shit. Lee Eaton, who handles the career of O'Hara Davies, stated, if the WBA doesn't order Romero versus Davies, then we will proceed with legal action. Davies' manager told BoxingScene.com's Jake Donovan, "We have already been shafted by letting Rolly fight for the vacant title. We ain't accepting no step-aside fee."
London's O'Hara Davies is ranked second among the WBA's 140-pound contenders. The 31-year-old Davies has won 7 consecutive fights since he lost a 12-round unanimous decision to British southpaw Jack Catterall in October of 2018 in England.
It all sounds good that Lee Eaton will pursue legal action should the WBA not order the fight between O'Hara and Rolly Romero, but have you actually read through their bylaws? They're covered.
They basically govern themselves, empower themselves to do as they wish at their own discretion. And who can police them?
90% of the time, nobody does. If you have to rely on the WBA to order that fight, you have to rely on them to do their job. Well, don't hold your breath because you might asphyxiate.
Lee's threatening legal action.
He's managing quite a few fighters right now, some champions. WBA Bantamweight Champion Nina Hughes, WBO Bantamweight Champion Dina Thorslund, O'Hara Davies, several others.
So according to Team Barroso, the people at the WBA themselves promised them a rematch, but if that happens, it encroaches on O'Hara Davies' title shot. Somebody's gonna get fucked.
Somebody is. They may leave Rolly Romero with no choice. Rolly, who has aspirations of fighting Ryan Garcia on pay-per-view. I don't even know how he intends to make that happen.
Ryan may have crossed over to Showtime for Gervonta Davis, but you're not Gervonta Davis.
It's not the craziest idea that Ryan Garcia versus Rolly Romero would sell at the box office. It might, but you see what's going on. So I figure Rolly would have to go to the DAZN side of things. He might, to have that fight with Ryan, and he might have to chuck the WBA title.
At which point, Ishmael Barroso and O'Hara Davies could fight for the newly vacated title.
But a scenario like that really is contingent upon Rolly making the Ryan Garcia fight happen. And it's hard to imagine that they're going to go for the exact same deal structure as before. The deal structure for Garcia versus Davis.
They're going to use that for Rolly versus Ryan.
Rolly is mildly retarded, so all this talk about a Ryan Garcia fight could be much ado about nothing.
I think if he had to choose between keeping the WBA title or fighting Ryan, he would choose to fight Ryan. He would choose to chuck the title, but that's assuming Ryan's really on the table.
And that's assuming he has the autonomy to cross over to DAZN, because I'm not sure Ryan's going to cross back over to Showtime.
Rolly's not the A-side to Ryan, you know.
It's a different dynamic between those two.
Rolly and Ryan.